I did have something thoroughly prepared, and I thought, God, this is boring. It's academic, it goes into obscure philosophical backwaters, and it sounds like I don't mean it. So instead, well, partly I'm going to talk about why I didn't go for this. But the most immediate reason was that, having panicked about the whole thing, this morning I was sitting outside and I got all these little cards with bits on, and it was windy and it all blew away, and I got the feeling that someone was trying to tell me something, so I'd better wake up and listen. So I just did a load more cards, of course, because one's a creature of habit, but they're rather different cards. And the first one is about why I am having trouble at the moment with saying anything that's at all interesting or useful. And it's because I've been going through rather an extraordinary period in my life, and I'm only going to talk about one bit of that, because the rest is just the sort of human condition stuff that we all have to cope with. But this actually has quite a bearing on any artist. I've always had extreme short sight, and the style I work in is really the result of having my nose very close to a piece of paper. And it seemed to work out well for 71 years. Well, yes, I probably started drawing before I was 1, so that's fair enough. And then I found I'd developed cataracts. Now, I'm used to my eyes being a nuisance. I've suffered from double vision for quite a few years now. I say suffered. Other people would have suffered if I hadn't acquired a skill at driving and ignoring the illusory middle lane that appeared, and ignoring any vehicles that were in that middle lane. Not a good thing to do, but I was a little bit in denial about it. I'd originally ended up with the double vision because a psychotic who was in the car next to me as I was driving was told by God to hit me in the eye with a rollerblade. And I didn't blame him, because, you know, if God tells you to do it, you do it. Anyway, it actually opened up a lot of possibilities to me, because I spent 6 weeks lying on my back with an eye full of blood, not knowing whether I was going to lose that eye. And it did alarm me a bit, the thought that I might now be a one-eyed artist. And I had to attend my local hospital at one point for yet another check to see whether the eye had cleared enough for them to find out what was going on in there. And I was sitting in the reception area, and I realised that, of course, seeing everything flat at the time, with only one eye, I mean everything, it's like looking at a flat surface, and there was one piece of the world that wasn't flat. And that was a painting. It was a landscape hanging on the wall opposite me, and that had depth. Someone had turned my two-dimensional world into a three-dimensional world, and it gave me some hope, because I thought, well, if I can see that, I can do that. We have communicated there. I don't know who painted that, but it gave me hope at that point. Anyway, no problems. Nothing like a bit of communication. Terrific. That's what artists think they're in the business of. So I was quite happy. And when I was told I had a couple of cataracts that needed removing, it didn't occur to me that there would be any problem. And when the consultant offered me the chance of getting rid of my short sight, to be given 20/20 vision, I thought, that's amazing, that is absolutely brilliant. So I said, yeah, let's go for it, as you would. And the operation was fascinating. It was great being conscious and having someone sticking things in your eye. It's a bit like a fairground experience in miniature. You know, you're dicing with possibilities that you wouldn't normally go through. Yeah, it was great. And at the end of it, 3 days later, for the first time in 71 years, I could look at the horizon without glasses and see it perfectly. And I went out into my garden, walked up to the top of the bank at the end of it, and across the valley I could see deer moving across a field, and that was so moving an experience. I thought, I'm never going to quite get over this one. It's terrific. Anyway, I had the second operation, and of course that corrected the sight in the next eye. Not quite as well, but it was still good. But it also removed my short sight. I'm now equipped with these close-up glasses, but of course my eyes don't actually focus finally, so it's all created problems. And that, on the back of it, creates all kinds of emotional problems. I'm trying to come to terms with losing what made me who I am in many ways. The real downer is that I was in the middle of a couple of commissions, and of course they wanted something very close to. And one of them, a commission for the Secret Garden Party Festival, what was wanted was something based on some Renaissance masterpiece. I could pick my own masterpiece and turn it into a festival painting using characters, or rather images, I suppose, that I'd made for them over the years. And I'd picked a painting that's almost a cliche, really. It's a painting by Peter Bruegel the Elder, and it's generally given the title of Wedding Dance in the Open Air, and there are a lot of joyful peasants all hopping up and down. And I was going to knock this into festival shape, which shows just how much hubris an artist could have, that I could take this incredible masterpiece from the 16th century without even taking into account what sort of masterpiece it was, and in reproducing it, basically desecrate it, spit on it, turn it into a load of festival nonsense, and enjoy doing it, and hopefully give some pleasure to other people in the course of it. Because it's a dialogue. Everyone concentrates on the art object, on the painting. That's just the bit in between. But of course, it's a thing. It's something that can be sold. It's something that can be offered in transactions of power. It's a picture it's not only pictorial in the sense that it's containing a picture of the world, but it's also pictorially a social icon that can be used in power play. Who owns it? Who does it represent? Etc., etc. Meanwhile, I was trying to paint the damn thing because I couldn't get my nose close up anymore. I couldn't focus my eyes. I've always had very bad eye-hand coordination. This is now terrible. It's a real struggle doing it. But because I was having to think so hard and work so hard, I was looking so hard at this painting that I was working from. And I became aware of so much in it. A whole world, 16th century world. People at what was basically a little festival in a world much simpler than our own. But the composition was extraordinary. I became aware of the most amazing things that were going on in it, the way that it was laid out, the way it actually translated the behaviour of people into this pictorial space and held your attention, what made it, if you like, a surviving great painting, because there were very similar paintings done by I think they were both his sons, Peter Bruegel the younger and a character with the rather dodgy sounding name of Jan Bruegel the Velvet. Anyway, his paintings, I've looked at some and they were pretty terrible compared to the old man's. What made them different? So this is something where critics obviously have got more to say than I would, but it was an interesting experience, and finally finished my bit of it, my rather humble version, knocked out in a frantic rush after weeks, indeed months, of messing about, deciding, no, this won't work, that won't work, what will this do for anyone? Absolutely nothing. Finally, on Monday morning, I got up about 7, got myself sorted out, realised I'd just about reached a deadline, sat down at 8 o'clock in the morning, worked through the day, got into a real drive. I was really going. It was the equivalent of an athlete operating in the zone. I was just going for it. And this is a wonderful feeling. You race through it. I worked on through the night, through the next day. I finally got to bed at 11 o'clock on Tuesday night, which is something I used to do quite frequently. But when I hit 70, I thought, I'm not going to do that again, which just shows how unable I am to ever carry out any kind of plan in my life. I live an unplanned life. Anyway, yes, I experienced it again, this feeling that nothing can go wrong. Every brushstroke is perfect. I can understand why anyone would say, I don't create, I channel. You feel that someone else is controlling your hands. Of course, it's nonsense, isn't it? Because you feel everything's perfect. That is a feeling that you're having. That is an experience you're having. What's going down on the bit of paper isn't necessarily the same as your perception. So we've yet to find out whether my zonal experience actually produced anything worthwhile. But at least they're happy enough with it, and they're going to pay me. So that's a start. But the ways in which the artist transacts these operations, and the way in which the painting carries them to other people, and the way in which they interpret it, is so full of chance. The whole thing, you never know where it's going, and yet it does go. And that for a lot of people, they have an awareness of art. They either operate within it or they're consumers of it. I hate to use the word consumer, but it's shorthand, and we live in that world. But it can be a shortcut. Things can happen. Communication can take place, and yet you never know what is being communicated. And out there, anything can be happening. So at the moment I'm very tired. There's this fallacy that the old don't need a great deal of sleep. This is nonsense. The old need more sleep, but they can't get it because they ache in places where they used to have fun. It's completely different. But you can still have fun. Anyway, during this time, I had studied a masterpiece, obtained amazing insights that I can't put into words because I don't know what those insights were, which is usually the way with insights. But at the end of it, combined with the exhaustion, I do feel different. And a lot of the things that I was going to say today have just evaporated in that space. I look at them and they're someone else's words. So I guess it was a bit of a trip, really. I studied a masterpiece and I produced a little illustration. I think we've got to be honest about that. That's all that happened. But I've still got my little bits of paper here gathered together, and I'm almost following them. I've got 10 minutes, then I'm going to miss out most of this. Right, I'm going to miss out most of this. We don't need this rubbish.
You can open that up to questions as well. It's entirely up to you, however you want.
Well, it's entirely up to everyone else as well. If someone wants to ask a question, they can tell me it's time that I stopped. Let's get down to psychedelic art. I don't quite know. I mean, it's hardly a school of art in the sense that, say, Impressionism is, partly because it's too young, but of course it's actually one of the oldest schools of art ever. But it's always been looked upon by the art establishment as a kind of genre painting. It's not quite the real thing. It's a bit like people who paint portraits of pets, or people who paint for railway buffs, produce pictures of steam locomotives thundering along the line. It's something not quite there. It's off to one side, which is good. It's a good place to be. It's a good place to be. You don't want to be in the art world. It stinks. It doesn't stop it being art, but it started on a strange footing, really, insofar as it was recognised as a particular area of visual art. It started really with, in San Francisco, I guess, really. Yeah, I think I'd put it there, probably. I'm going to leave out the other bits. Probably the Avalon Ballroom posters by people like Victor Moscoso. And they appeared in reproduction everywhere. They were in markets. And then followed, a few years later, and these went worldwide, a number of paintings that took a very, very long time to paint by, again from California, but from rural California. And there were artists like Gage Taylor and Bill Martin, whose works filled shop windows across the Western world as posters. It was economics that partly made them posters. Some of these paintings would take 2 or 3 years to paint. It was impossible to live without turning out posters. So the first that the art establishment of the West saw of these things was posters in shop windows. Well, that means it's not quite art. Unless the painting comes first, unless the painting is exhibited in some prestige gallery. But it doesn't matter, because these paintings, which were detailed magical worlds, exquisite paintings, they carried a power that was running alongside everything else that was happening at this time. And they were widespread in the early 70s, which was when, really, I suppose, acid went onto the high street and wasn't just there for some hippie aristocracy. And looking at these paintings, I can say that however you end up interpreting the nature of art, the enduring function of art is as metaphor. It's a way of changing concepts. It's a way of making you think that something isn't quite what you thought it was. In Western culture, if we go along this route of grammar about the kind of language that's used about it, there has been for quite a long time a tendency to see art not as a metaphor but as a simile. It is like something. People want to recognise things, which is fair enough. That is fine, that's fine. It's one way into a mystery, and it's up to the artist. And I certainly haven't got the nerve to produce totally abstract works. It is up to the artist to provide these steps, perhaps, into it. But a simile it may be, but basically it is a metaphor. It is a way that you can look at the world, rightly or wrongly, serve it up in a slightly different form, as though it's a parallel universe. It may resemble it closely, it may resemble it very little at all, but somewhere out there, with a bit of luck, there's at least one person who's going to look at what you do, and it will just click. Nevertheless, the artist has to pick what they're doing. And that happens really outside. If you're talking about the whole body of work, I think it happens outside the conscious mind, far outside it and almost before it. It happens, I guess, possibly something in childhood. In my case, I know where it goes. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein always said, if you want to know the meaning of a word, look at how you learnt to use it. Well, I'm not quite sure how I learnt to use the word of art. Oddly enough, my mother was an artist at the time. She'd have been a commercial artist, I guess. She painted furniture. She was brilliant, but she always denied that she was an artist. Wouldn't have the nasty stuff in the house, really. I mean, art. The only art I encountered with a capital A was on her collection of postcards, which she used as reference material for her work. Until, well, now this is sort of odd. I suppose I learnt to use the word art when I got to secondary school, and art meant an hour in which you mucked about. It was lazy time. I mean, I probably made more use of it than most kids. But when it really happened to me, it was without the word art. My parents were, I guess they were traditional London working class Tories. They saw their future as rising up in the world, and I was supposed to be the one who carried on and made a fortune or something. But as a result, they were easily conned, and they sent me to a private school, which was supposed to give me a head start. It was a place of unbelievable savagery, and I was a timid child who couldn't actually speak with the right accent to keep them happy there. But on the other hand, I seemed to be fairly bright, so a lot was expected of me. As a result, I spent a lot of time being punished in various savage ways. And what was laughingly called detention, which was basically putting a child alone in a room for an hour, locking them in, and leaving them, which was asking for trouble. On one occasion, I did make a run. I did a runner, got out of the window, climbed down a drain pipe. But on this particular occasion, I couldn't get the window open, and in a cupboard, I found a collection of old National Geographic magazines with which to while away my time. And in it, this child, who'd really seen very little of art, discovered a long illustrated article about the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch. Last Judgments, grinning demons, people being pulled apart, strange metamorphoses of humans into all kinds of robotic creatures, demons, the lot. And one thing I have to explain is, as a child, I was what in those days was called a delicate child. In other words, I was often ill. And 1 minute. And I had this tendency to develop very high temperatures with any small illness. I took Hieronymus Bosch home with me in my head. I'd always hallucinated with my high temperatures. I'd get up to danger level. I'd be around 104 at that time, which was the way to go. And anyway, I took Hieronymus Bosch home in my head. And I was 8 years old, and a little bit later, a couple of months later, I had chickenpox, and I hallucinated. My temperature went up. I was there with Hieronymus Bosch's Last Judgment. That's probably the place to stop.